I say, if you're waking up in the morning and you're not happy, you can either leave the job, do something about it. You can decide that for whatever reason that you're going to put up with it for now and you're going to positively just put up with it and let it go. The one thing that you should not do is moan about it when you leave your front door, moan about it when you get home, moan about it to your colleagues, moan about it to your partner, moan about it to your friends, because it's not good for your mental health. It's not good for their mental health, and it just won't do you any good. For me, trying to take a positive approach about how you're going to deal with the things that aren't right in your life is a key lesson, one of my key lessons.
Hello and welcome back to Leading the Scale Up. It's the podcast that explores the leadership required to grow and evolve organisations during their most pivotal phase. I'm Ben Morton, a leadership trainer, executive coach and keynote speaker. And most importantly, someone who's passionate about helping leaders scale businesses and themselves with clarity, confidence and care. Today, I'm joined by an incredible guest who has led at the very top in business and in government, as well as being a peer in the House of Lords. Lord Mark Price spent 34 years with the John Lewis Partnership, including over 8 years as Managing Director of Waitrose, during which time he nearly doubled the store count. He later became Deputy Chairman of the Partnership, the Chair of Business in the Community, and was appointed as the UK Minister for Trade and Investment in 2016. He's now the founder of WorkL, a global platform that helps individuals and organisations create happier workplaces, built on the insights from his entire leadership career. In this episode, we explore the real business case for happiness, not as a fluffy concept, but as a proven, data-backed driver of commercial success. We dive into the 6 factors that genuinely shape workplace happiness, why they matter for scaling businesses, and how leaders can create a culture where performance and well-being go hand in hand. Mark, one of the things that always strikes me as quite interesting is that when we are either scaling a business or indeed stepping into a new, bigger leadership role, there's always more to be done, right? There's more jobs, there's more stuff to take care of, but we don't suddenly get more time in having any given day. So it strikes me that in order to be successful as a leader in a bigger position or trying to scale a business, we've only got so much bandwidth. So to do all that new stuff, we end up with a choice, right? We can either work longer and harder and faster and potentially burn out, or we can start to think about what are some of the things I need to stop doing so that I can do all of the things that I now have to get done. So with that as the context, when you were growing Waitrose from, I believe it was 183 to 346 stores, what were some of the things that you personally had to stop doing as a leader to enable you to scale the business?
That's a really good question, Ben. And the reality is that the bigger the business you're in, the different type of role you need to take on. So growing up, my dad had his own small one-man wholesale business, and he did everything. I mean, he took in the deliveries and made the deliveries and did the books and answered the telephone, and we'd all muck in as kids and we'd help him. And then obviously when I started with John Lewis and Waitrose, I started as a trainee, went to different departments, then became a department manager, et cetera, until in the end I ran Waitrose. And the reality is that you need to be really clear on what your role is. In a small business, so scaling now WorkL, I do far more than when I was running Waitrose. And one of the things that I would say to the senior team in Waitrose is that we've all got a position on the pitch. So the property director is responsible for going out, purchasing properties, and then building the supermarkets. The finance director is responsible for making sure we've got the financing in place to make that happen. The retail director is responsible for making sure that he hires the right people to run that shop and to deliver the service. The distribution director is responsible for making sure that the goods that are delivered on time in the right place. The commercial director is responsible for making sure they buy the goods for that shop that our customers want to buy. They all have their own role. When you are the leader, your job, I felt my job, was to make sure that all of those different functions work well together and that they understood each other's needs. But then my job was about persuading the board that we should get the money in the first instance, making sure that we got the best possible external coverage so that people were aware that we're opening, and was really about building the brand in the largest term. So I always felt it's a bit like the difference between 5-year-olds playing football and 25-year-olds playing football. The 5-year-olds all chase the ball. The 25-year-olds know what position they're playing in, and the manager controls and coordinates. So for me, that's the really big thing to understand. Now, when I went to Waitrose, it was already a big business. It already had a turnover of 3.5 billion. It already employed 40,000 people. What happened in my time there is we went to 70,000 plus people, and we went to a turnover of 7 billion, but it was still a big business. So in terms of focus, in order to get it to that size, more focus on building and property, more focus on how do you scale up and make sure that your new people are aware of the ethos of the business, more focus on the financing. But the fundamentals of leadership between £3 billion Waitrose and the £7 billion Waitrose really weren't that different, but they are very different from dealing with a scale up and dealing with a massive corporate.
Yeah. And what was prior to being MD of Waitrose, what was the job you were in there prior to that?
So I ran strategy for the John Lewis partnership. So I was in a group role.
Got you.
And I looked after strategy for the partnership and IT. So they fell under me. Before that, I was the retail and marketing director for Waitrose. Before that, I was in John Lewis department store. So I was the managing director of the John Lewis in Cheadle, the managing director of the John Lewis in High Wycombe. So I came up through the company and I did every job. I mean, right from grassroots. So I knew the organisation really well. And what I discovered, as I said, is that at every step in that journey, you find that the job's different and you need to do your bit and do your bit really well and trust that the people around you are going to perform their bit really well.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And Mark, sort of having spent all the time you have with John Lewis and Waitrose, which is a pretty famously values-driven organisation, right? Certainly from what we see as Waitrose John Lewis customers. But how did the values hold up when the business was really, really scaling? And what's your view on how leaders of scale-up organisations can make sure that the values do or make sure the values don't, let's say, get compromised as the organisation scales?
I was really lucky in all my years in John Lewis and Waitrose that I never, ever felt uncomfortable about a decision I had to make. I never felt that I was asked to do things or say things that in any way compromised my personal values or morals. And I never felt that the company did things that were not altogether straightforward and in the best interest of the people that worked there and wider society. So I never found it difficult. There were, of course, times when we had to make difficult decisions about people that weren't the right fit, branches that we opened that didn't do as well as we hoped and we had to close. But in those circumstances, I always thought, what we have to do is act in the best interest of the many. And that means that from time to time, you have to make tough decisions. So, and particularly around convenience shops, because on average, 1 in 10 convenience shops, doesn't matter who opens it, they don't work, either because the location's wrong or there's a big office nearby and it moves. There's always a reason why. And so particularly when we went into that market, we did it knowing that some wouldn't work and some people would lose their jobs. But again, we always did that with a pretty clear conscience. The same in scaling WorkL now. Every day I make decisions that I genuinely believe are in the best interest of the business, the shareholders, the people that work there. And I've never felt I need to compromise our values. If I did, to be honest, I wouldn't do the job. I wouldn't stay. It's more important to me that you do the right thing than compromise on either your personal values. And if you run the business as I do now or did in Waitrose, then ultimately you're responsible for the values you're going to accept, the behaviours you're going to accept of people.
I feel like I'm talking to a kindred spirit here, Mark, or someone with a very similar view around leadership and the importance of values. And that being the case, I'm going to see if I can test an idea I have myself, that sometimes these days I start to wonder if it's slightly idealistic and somehow detached from reality. But I have a sense that if as an organisation we have a set of organisational values that are true, that are lived and breathed and really are part of the organisational DNA, then one of the ways we can use those to great effect is when the organisation is faced with a difficult decision. And let's say it's one of those probably quite frequent leadership decisions where we're operating in the grey and there is no distinctively black or white, right or wrong answer. For me, I think one of the backstops or aids to decision making in those situations is to go back to the organisational values and go, okay, we've got this really tough call to make. If we make this decision, is it congruent? Is it aligned with our organisation's values and what we truly stand for? Was there a time in Waitrose where you consciously kind of had to do that, where you was making a tricky decision and you used the values as a fallback or as a tool to help you test or validate that you was making the right decision?
Yeah, I suppose so. But I think that given the nature of Waitrose and John Lewis, it was always in the ether. Me, the best descriptions of culture is it's the sediment of past transactions. So the values that you have in the business, they're not about really what you put it on a chart on the wall. It's about the interactions people have every day and their lived experience of that business. And there are some things that you write down and you say, look, constitutionally, this is how we will act. This is what we will do. So you do have some rules about how you want to behave. So whether that's people will pay us in 90 days or it could be anything. And then, of course, along the way, you make decisions about, are you going to relax that for one reason or another? Quite often what I would do at the board in Waitrose, particularly when we had tough decisions to make about things, is find out in advance who wasn't in favour and who was in favour. It's always pretty easy to do. And then at the board, I would ask people to advocate in favour and against. And I would say, look, there's no point us making the decision if we all sit around the table and say, yay, it's a great idea. Therefore, what I do want at every board where we got difficult decisions is somebody to advocate against us doing it and somebody to advocate in favour of us doing it. Because of that, I never felt people ever felt uncomfortable saying, I think this is a rubbish idea for these reasons.
Yeah, amazing.
Because of that, we'd have really open conversations. And at the end of it, everybody would feel that we really had understood the pros and the cons. And then more often than not, we would say, okay, let's try it, given that we know that there are risks. And how can we try it and mitigate as much of the risk as we can, but knowing that if it doesn't work, we'll roll back. So we haven't lost a lot. Mm-hmm. And there are so many things that we did that way. We trialled it. We opened a market town format. We opened a small store format. We did a trial to sell Waitrose products in Boots. We did a trial with Shell to sell in Shell petrol filling stations. We did a trial with Moto to sell on motorway service stations. We exported around the world. We opened shops in the Middle East. And every one of those was a difficult decision because they weren't straightforward. And you were thinking about, do we invest in our core and grow more of our own shops? Or do we expand through partners? And if we do, which partners? And so they were all good examples of not necessarily straightforward decisions where we had very good debates. Everybody felt that they'd had their point of view. And in the majority of, those, there were others we didn't do. In the majority of those, we said, okay, we'll trial it and we'll see where we go. And everybody therefore felt comfortable. So I always managed those difficult things in that way. Everybody knew what we stood for. Everybody around that table had the best interests of the business at heart, but everybody compromised to get to ultimately a better position.
What you've just shared there, Mike, I think is one of those things that when you suddenly hear it, sounds so simple and obvious, yet doesn't happen that often. I just want to really make sure for the sake of listeners that we recap on that. So you say when there were those difficult decisions to be made, you would specifically ask for a person or a couple of people to take the opposing position and advocate against? Were they generally people who you knew had some doubts and were potentially against the idea, or could it have been anybody, just ask somebody to take the opposite perspective?
Yeah, well, 9 times out of 10, it was somebody I knew who had reservations, and I would ask them to prepare that, and everybody in the room knew, and I would present it as, I've asked Tony to present the case against doing this, that I want us all to listen to, and I've asked Tom to prepare the case to do it. So, what we'll do is we'll go around and draw it out. So nobody, in the instance I've given, Tony didn't feel that he was being victimized by being against it. Everybody listened respectfully. And at the end, we got to a shared decision. Tony knew that his reservations had been heard and we were going to do it, but we'd put mitigations in place, or vice versa. Tom knew that he was in favour, but there were strong views in the other way, but they'd had their point of view. So, yeah, just acknowledging that people around the table are going to have a different point of view. When you get loggerheads at the board, it's just really unhelpful. It's great people have different points of view. In fact, it's really good because what it draws out is the nuances in your approach. What's really bad is that people don't feel they can express that without getting into a personal slangy match.
That's why I think kind of your strategy there is so powerful, right? Many people have spoken about, much has been written about the need to have healthy debate and healthy challenge. But the mechanism you're talking about here just makes it totally safe for that to take place, right? Because someone is acting on your request, which is very different to saying, like, come on, guys, who's got a different perspective here? And a lot of the time, people will hold back, even in a fairly psychologically safe environment. People have different levels of comfort with that sort of thing. I mean, it's just a brilliant mechanism making that happen. Love it.
The other one which I've always found is really helpful, Ben, is when you can tell that people around the table are unhappy. And it's pretty obvious in their body language, in their behaviours afterwards. And so one of the things, and we'll come on to it later, that's really important to me, and I was taught on my first day in John Lewis, is the importance of people being happy in their jobs, happy at work, and the benefits that come from that. And so, again, without any rancor or difficulty, I would just say to somebody, you just don't seem happy. It really concerns me that you're not happy. Let's talk about why you're not happy. When you turn the debate to their happiness and their feelings, it's much easier to flush out, what is it that you're not happy with? What is it about the organisation you're not happy with? And then it's a different debate. And it gets you to a place ultimately where you can say, I don't think you are going to be happy here, and that's not good for you. So let me find you another role, whether it's here or elsewhere, that is going to give you the happiness that you deserve in your working life. And so framing these things about you're not right, you're not wrong, we all have a different point of view, and framing it is that ultimately, if your values don't match and therefore you're unhappy, let's talk about your happiness at work, not about the fact you've got different values. And it's just a much easier conversation to have.
Yeah, I love that. Love that. I want to come on to WorkL shortly, Mark, but whilst we're on the subject of, I guess, leadership more broadly, what is one myth about leadership that you see or have seen repeated again and again, but in your experience, it's just plain wrong, it's not true?
I think there'd be two, if I can, Ben.
Absolutely.
And when I hear people say it's lonely at the top. If you're feeling lonely, you're not leading. You've got no followers. If you've got no followers, you're going to be lonely. So the great trick in leadership is to make sure that, one, you've got a very clear plan and it's really well communicated and everybody understands that plan because of the communication you've done. That's rule number one. Rule number two is you've got to get people to want to embrace that plan. You've got to make them feel that they're a critical part of delivering that plan. So there's a great story in the Second World War about, people giving in their pots and pans and saucepans to make munitions. I mean, the reality was that they couldn't be used, but people felt they were playing their part. Yeah. They felt it was important. And there's that story, whether true or not, about Kennedy visiting Cape Canaveral, as it was then, to visit the people who were planning the moon landings. And he went along a line and there was a janitor in the line, and he got to the janitor and he said, "What do you do?" And he said, "I'm putting a man on the moon." He'd been made to feel as though his role was so important in the overall mission. Leaders do that. Great leaders make sure that all of the people around them understand their role, understand that their role is critical, and therefore it feels like it's a team. You're not on your own. There are all these people who are supporting the greater venture. The last thing a leader has to do is to be relentlessly optimistic, to keep everybody on side. So when I hear people say leadership is lonely, my first response is to say, I'm not sure you're doing it right, because, your people should want to follow you. Your people should feel committed. You should all feel in it together. That's the first thing. I think there are some things about the leader, obviously, sometimes has to be the one that makes a difficult decision. If you said to me, leadership is about sometimes making really difficult decisions, I'd accept that. But the loneliness piece, I'm not sure about. The other thing, and it's used a lot now, and I feel really uncomfortable about it. And I was recently at an event, and there were 12 very senior business people around the table. And it became a common theme for one after another for them to say, everybody's a leader in our business. And I don't think that's right. I think that people have within their gambit, within their framework, the opportunity to make decisions which are about leadership. But ultimately, the person sitting at the top has got to make the decisions about where we spend our capital, where we spend our money and invest on people, what our strategy is going to be, what our communication is going to be, how we get everybody to buy in, and lastly, how we're going to be optimistic and ongoing. You can't delegate that to somebody working at a junior level in a business. So when people talk about, it's about leadership, everybody's going to take part, I don't think that's right. I think that there is a role for everybody to do something around leadership within their area. But on a business-wide level, one person ultimately has got to say, the buck is going to stop with me. You're all on board, you're a great team, but if it goes wrong, I'm the one who's going to take the fall, Ben. So those two things I think are far more nuanced than the kind of glib rhetoric I hear that everyone's a leader in our business and it's lonely at the top.
Yeah, do you know what, Mark? Your first point there around it, leadership being lonely, and if you find that to be the case, you're probably not doing it right. It's really interesting. You've just brought something to the front of my mind that I'd not thought about probably for 20 plus years, and I think is so true, right? So my listeners to the show know my first career was in the military, and we were always taught, like, look after your people, put your soldiers first. Generally, like, we'll make personal sacrifices for our soldiers. And I think what that does is, by demonstrating that we won't sacrifice their needs for our own, we show that we care, right? And those that we lead start to trust us. But I think what that also does, it makes them want to reciprocate and support us. And the moment you've taken me back to was in 2003, probably late April, just after we'd crossed the border into Iraq. And I'd led half of my troop on a particularly tense sort of operation at night time. And I've hardly ever smoked in my career. As a young lieutenant in the army, I occasionally smoked a little Hamlet cigar, normally when I was stressful. So I was standing outside this big warehouse in the port in Qazar where we were stationed, just smoking a Hamlet just by myself, just trying to decompress. And I'd been there seconds probably. I think I'd walked out, taken my Hamlet out of the tin, lit it. And in that time, one of my corporals and one of my lance corporals got a pincer movemented me and went, "Are you all right, boss?" And they straight away checked in. That could have been a lonely moment, me sitting there processing, did I make the right calls? Did I do things right? Could it have gone better? But straight away that they were there. Now, could have been chance, but actually it probably wasn't, right? So I absolutely agree. If it's lonely, you're probably not doing it right.
Yeah, I think that's right. They don't want to support you.
Yeah.
They don't think you're doing the right things. They don't think you've got their back. So, I mean, if you're leading, as you say, you're looking after your troops or you're looking after your people, and you're doing that to motivate them so they're bought in, they should be giving you that kind of support. So I completely agree.
Yeah, brilliant. Mark, is there ever, in your view, a conflict between scaling, being a high growth business, and being a fair business? Can the two exist?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I see no contradiction. If there's no reason particularly if your business has a real purpose, whatever that purpose may be, to scale it, to get more people to enjoy your products or more people to enjoy your services. I mean, that's a good thing, wanting to do that. No, I've never seen any contradiction between wanting to grow something, to scale it, to make it more successful, and not treating people well and fairly.
Great. So the next question was, have you ever had to choose between the two? So I assume that's a no then.
No, not that I can remember, Ben.
That's a great answer, right? Because again, it proves that some of the things I sometimes talk about on this show, or with those I might be coaching or mentoring around sort of values-led leadership and doing the right thing, not the easy thing, it proves that's not an ideal, right? It can exist, and we can be very successful as an individual and as an organization by leading in that way. It doesn't have to be a either or, does it?
I don't think so. And I've got a very clear view, which I know you'll come on to, about how you lead or manage people to get the best from them. Mm-hmm. And so I've never wavered away from that from my very earliest years with John Lewis. So I have a very clear blueprint about what you do to get the best from people, and I don't move from it. There are times when financially you think, oh, can I afford to do X and Y? But I've always thought, no, ultimately, you've just got to think about your people and how you support them to achieve their best. And if you do that relentlessly, you'll get there in the end.
Brilliant. We should probably talk about WorkL, because we've touched on it a few times. I think what sits behind WorkL has been embedded in what we've spoken about so far. So can you tell us, Mark, why did you decide to start WorkL?
So it really goes back to my very first day working for John Lewis as a graduate trainee in 1982. And I started at their shop in Southampton, and there was a brilliant managing director there called Brian O'Callaghan, who went on to be the retail director and CEO for John Lewis. On the very first day, I sat down with 4 other graduates, and he said the supreme purpose of the John Lewis partnership is the happiness of the people that work here. And what he set out was the vision that the founder of the business, Beedham Lewis, had had 100 years before, when he thought that if I look after my people and I put them first, then they'll work harder, stay longer, have less sick absence, as a consequence of which I'm going to have lower staff turnover, lower sick absence, higher productivity. As a consequence of all of this, my customers will get better service. As a consequence of that, over the medium long term, we'll be a more successful business. And it's a really straightforward idea. In modern times, Richard Branson says much the same.
Yeah.
And so I then spent 34 years in the business, laterally running Waitrose, thinking about what does it mean to be happy at work. And the business was fantastic with me, Ben. I went to the London Business School in INSEAD and Columbia Business School, just to spend time thinking about what does it mean. So what's in the culture and what needs to be extra to the culture, just to define it better. And when I went to Waitrose, we started to take on shops from competitors, as you said in the beginning.
Yeah.
We almost doubled in size during my 10 years there. And we agonized about whether we should take on shops from our competitors, because under Chupi, you had to take their people on. And a lot of people thought, well, they're not going to be as good as people we could recruit straight into Waitrose. But we had to take them on, and we decided we had to take the opportunity. It was too good to miss with all these shops coming on the market. But what was extraordinary is when we took the shops on and we started to bring in place the behaviours, culture, things that I later set out in WorkL, we started to see a huge improvement. So staff turnover went from 70% to 20%. Sick absence went from around 20% to 3%. Customer service improved, productivity improved, and we got an almost immediate improvement on the bottom line. So on average, the shops, before you got to any sales uplift, were something between £100,000 to £150,000 more profitable. Your staff turnover was lower, sick absence was lower, productivity was higher. So having discovered that and having thought about what drives it, I then had a brief spent in government. I was 2 years as the UK's trade minister. And then I thought, what am I going to do now? And I thought, well, what I'm going to do is set up a digital platform that sets out, I thought about John Lewis Partnership, thought about driving engagement / happiness of employees to improve commercial performance. A very brilliant woman called Kelly Brewer I started to work with. She built a platform, started to get individuals go and take our Happy at Work test. We now, in the last year, had 1 million people take that test. So, tens of thousands of people every week now go and take the test. They tell us where they work. So we've got this amazing database on where the happiest places to work. And then we started to get companies that started to say, this is really good. When you work with us on improving happiness, we now work with over 1,000 companies around the world. We run the Sunday Times Best Places to Work, but we don't just do that now in the UK. We do it in Ireland, Australia, the Philippines, South Africa, Kenya, UAE, Egypt, India. I could go on. So what we do now all over the world is to try and help people understand what is it that makes you happy at work. And we do that to help the individual, but also we do it to help managers. So it goes back to the point I was making a little while ago. I've got it in my own mind, and I've set out in several books now what drives happiness at work, how managers can use that to drive commercial performance, because all of our data shows that people who are happy at work harder. They give extra discretionary effort, which is good for the company. For the individual, if you are happy at work against somebody who's unhappy in their job, you're paid more, you're more likely to be promoted, your mental health's better. So for a whole host of reasons, it's good for the individual, it's good for companies, and it's good for society to have people who are happy in their working lives.
Hey, here's a quick question for you. Your function, business unit, or entire company is scaling, but is your leadership team keeping up? What got you to this stage won't necessarily get you through the next phase of growth. The Leadership Capability Scorecard helps you assess how well your senior managers are leading through growth. It'll help you spot the gaps before they become critical roadblocks. It's quick, it's free, and it will instantly give you the insights you need. Take the scorecard now. The link's in the show notes. Back to the episode. So what do you say, Mark, to those people, those either senior leaders or business owners out there who for some reason still feel that focusing on happiness is in some ways unbusinesslike, uncommercial, nice to have, or just don't buy into it? Because I think there are still quite a few leaders and organizations out there like that, where it's just push, push, push. It's just all about the kind of the sales number. It's all about growing the top line, reducing costs, and just don't buy into it.
So the easy one is that we've got all the data that shows you that people who are happy in their jobs perform better. Organizations that have happier employees perform better, give extra effort. On average, profits are 20% higher, productivity is higher, and we measure that now in over 1,000 companies. And we can even measure it on a national basis. We can tell you which countries have the happiest employees. And guess what? The UK is one of the, bottom of the G20, both for happiness and for productivity. So all of the data is really clear. On a moral level, why would you want to go to work and make your people unhappy? I mean, I can't get my head around somebody who'd say, you know what, I'm going in today, I'm going to make the people at work really miserable because it gives me a kick or for whatever reason. So I can't understand on a moral level why you want to do it. So financially, it makes no sense. Morally, it makes no sense. But then it's defining what happiness is. So I think people have got a really airy-fairy notion of happiness at work and what is it? And so what I do, what our platform does, is it measures what genuinely creates happiness at work. It's based on all I learned at John Lewis and Waitrose. It's based on what I learned at business school, working with behavioral scientists. And there are 6 things, Ben, and I'll whiz through them really quick. So number 1 is reward and recognition. People need to know that they're being paid fairly. Fair pay is really important. But it isn't the biggest motivator. If you are paid 10% less than you think you are worth, it niggles away at you all the time. If you are paid 10% more than you think in your mind you are worth, and remember you compare yourself against people like you doing the same sort of job as you, then you feel good, but it doesn't make you skip into work every day. So it's a hygiene factor. More important is recognition, just telling people they've done a good job, giving them feedback. And in the UK, we're rubbish at it, Ben. On average, we give people positive feedback once every 10 weeks. In the States, it's twice a week, on average. You've done a great job. Well done. We really depend on you. So reward and recognition, step number one. Step number two is about information sharing. And that's, do I have enough information to do my job really well? Or have I just been thrown in the deep end without the training or the kit to do it? Two, do I have a context for what I'm doing? Do I understand what this organization is trying to achieve? Do I understand what my department is trying to achieve? If you're doing your job in isolation of that, you just think, feel like a mushroom and all that goes with that.
That came out quite clearly in Google's Project Aristotle, right? I'm sure you're familiar with. They found that sense of purpose and connection, knowing why you're doing what you're doing and what impact it has was what they found as well, right?
So having the information to do that the company shares it with you.
Yeah.
So that's all part of the plan. Is there a plan? Do I understand the plan? What's my role in this plan? Three is about empowerment. Am I trusted? Am I respected to do my job? Or is there somebody looking over my shoulder every day? And where people are trusted, they can be rewarded, they can be recognized, they can be informed. So many of the other things are dependent on somebody being trained well enough that you can empower them and leave them to do their job. Number four is about well-being. Does my manager, does this organization genuinely care about me as an individual? My mental, physical, financial well-being. Do they care? And if you work for a manager and you think they don't care about me one job, I can tell you, you're not going to be happy at work or as happy as you could be. Number five is a sense of pride. Do I feel really proud of what I do? Do I feel proud of my job? Do I feel proud of where I work? Number six, the last is, I call it job satisfaction, but it's made really of a couple of things. The first thing is just, do you like your job? So many people go into work every day, they just don't like their job, but they fell into it. Why are you doing this job? Well, out of school, I kind of worked here and I've stayed here first, but I don't like it. Do you like your job? It's really obvious. The second is about career development. Am I being developed? Am I learning? Am I growing? Am I being given new challenges? When people feel that stops, they become far less happy in their job. They take me for granted now. They don't try and spend as much on training on me as they used to spend on me. So career development, and really, really important with the young cohort who are obviously developing their skills. And then the last and the most important, it goes back to your story. It's really about your line manager, and the relationship you have with your line manager is absolutely critical. If I was to stop in the street who was working and I said to them, look, I'd like you to score for me 1 to 10, how you get on with your manager, 10 being I get on fantastically well, 1 being can't stand them. I can tell from the answer to that one question how somebody will score on the entire happy at work test. If they say 1, they'll score in the 20% overall. If they say 10, they'll score in the 80% overall, because the line manager is absolutely critical in delivering reward, recognition, information, empowerment, well-being, and pride in your job, career development. They're responsible one way or another for all of those things. What I discovered is it's those 6 things that drive happiness at work. I don't think there's anybody out there, hard nose or otherwise, that would say that any of those is not perfectly reasonable. Just when you say it's about happiness. But that, for me, I'd rather say to somebody, are you happy in your job, than are you engaged in your job? It's just like if you said to a professional golfer, were you happy with that putt? It's just a term that were you happy with that meal when you're in a restaurant? We use that term a lot to gauge a feeling and emotion. Are you happy? What I've tried to do is to set out in really clear terms what that means in a business context. What does it mean to be happy at work? And that's my code. That's the code I work to with the people that I manage. That's the code that I'd like them to work with the people that they manage. And what I know after nearly 40 years in business now is it works. If you think about those themes, it drives performance.
I love it, Mark. We could talk just around this for hours, I think, but a few things spring to mind that I want to kind of share for the benefit of everybody listening as well. I think you're right around sort of the word happy or happiness it has all sorts of different meanings and connotations for people, right? I think those, let's call them slightly more hard-nosed business people, can link happiness with softness or happiness with a low performance culture. We can still drive for performance. We can still hold people to account and have very high standards, but at the same time focus on happiness, right? Because happiness can be an enabler of those. And I've believed in this for many, many years. I think deep down it's always been part of my leadership style. But even for me, what really hit it home for me was on a previous podcast, I was interviewing a retired British Army general, Sir James Everard. I think his penultimate job before he retired was Deputy Supreme Allied Commander for NATO in Europe, right? And in that podcast, there's a clip where he says, "Ben, I've always believed a happy headquarters is an effective headquarters." And even for somebody who was totally bought into this, that was slightly mind-blowing when I went, hang on, second in command of NATO in Europe, one of the things he's focusing on is happiness. Like, these are people who go to war and happiness is top of his agenda. Well, then surely we should all be taking note of it in business.
Well, I agree. And in the Navy, I've heard people say many times, a happy ship is an efficient ship and an efficient ship is a happy ship. I'm sure you went on missions in your time in the armed forces and you'd get back and you'd say to your team, guys, were we happy with that? And you didn't mean, did we all float round going, yeah, let's have a party. You used it in a heart, when you said, are we happy? What you were doing was open up a conversation that went into the detail. So for me, happiness is a shorthand for how do you get the best from your people at work? That's really what I'm talking about. What behaviours do you need to put in place, drive the happiness of people to drive operational effectiveness? I think the word got somehow messed up in the 60s with the...
Yeah, that's just what I was going to say.
But, I think it is the best single word to describe how we all feel when we want to describe something. Were you happy with that shot in golf? Were you happy with the way you drove today? I can't think of a better term that you would regularly use to ask somebody to say how they're feeling about their performance.
The other point I wanted to share around your 6 sort of drivers of performance and happiness. Number 1 you mentioned was reward and recognition. And I think it was about 2.5 years ago, I came across some fascinating research that came from Berkeley. And they differentiated, and I'd never thought about this before, but they differentiated between recognition and appreciation. And there were some studies done in terms of the effect that the two had on productivity. Now, if memory serves me correctly, it said when people feel recognised at work, their productivity increases by around, I think, about 24% on average, I believe. And sort of recognition was defined as you deliver something, you get some sort of recognition for it, either praise or here's some sort of physical, financial kind of reward. Appreciation they defined as being much more humanistic. So we are much more, it's about being appreciated as a human being. So even if someone has perhaps failed to achieve or hit a target, as their leader or manager, we can still give some appreciation in the effort that went into that. And it found that when people felt appreciated at work, their performance, again, I believe, went up by about 44%, which I found fascinating. As I said, I'd never really distinguished between recognition and appreciation. But I guess it was evidence for me around this point when people truly feel valued and that their leader, manager, boss sort of cares about them. That's what drives productivity rather than just you hit your target. Well done, Mark. Here's a voucher. Go to the cinema on me. It's the deeper sense, isn't it, that matters.
So I think about recognition in the broadest term, not just your bonus, here's 100 quid or whatever. I've always thought about you recognise somebody's performance to the organisation. And that can be a thank you or well done or, I appreciate how hard you're working, or it could be you've done brilliantly, go to the cinema with your other half and it's on us. I've always seen it as that broader sweep. So that's interesting that they broke it down in that way. But I do think that I would see it as being both of those things, appreciating somebody's place in the organisation and recognising them in some kind of tangible way.
And Mark, clearly sort of happiness has been at the front of your mind and part of your leadership style since you first joined John Lewis. And you said the idea for WorkL really emerged as you finished your stint in government. Was it a slow burn, though, where you was gradually formulating this idea, or was there more of a defining moment where you went, this is a problem I see that I can help solve, as is often the case when we hear people's entrepreneurial journeys? They suddenly spot a problem and decide to fix it. What was your journey like there?
That's a really good question, Ben. So towards the end of my time in John Lewis, I decided that I would write a book which was called Fairness for All. It set out what I'd learned really in the 34 years, and it set out those 6 steps. I subsequently built on that, and a book called Happy Economics came out last year. In terms of sort of doing the research on that, what became really clear for me, and I'd only really focused internally, there was a huge percentage of people who weren't happy in their jobs. What we see now at WorkL is about half the people who complete the Happy at Work test we would define as being not happy. And then more than 80% are not happy in some aspect of their working life.
Wow.
There was a piece of work done by Deloitte, I think it was in 23, a wellbeing report, and they had over 80% of people who weren't happy in their working life. And so when I wrote the book and started to research more, what I discovered is that whether you take a 50% figure or an 80% figure, literally hundreds of millions, if not billions of people were going to work every day and not enjoying it. And I thought, but this can't be right, particularly as I spent years in an organisation that tried to do a good job in looking after their people. And so wrote the book. I couldn't publish the book when I was in government. You're not allowed to. So I published it just as I was leaving. And in the book, I said, look, if you're really concerned and you want to improve your happiness, here are the things that you could measure. And so it was that was the catalyst to say to Kelly, I'd like just to build a really simple test on a website anyone in the world can go to free of charge. They can take this test and they can see how happy they are. And what we'll do is give them advice to say, if you're not happy about reward and recognition, here are some things you can go and do. And if you're not happy about information sharing, here are some things you can go and do. So it started off me doing that. And not long after, Ben, a couple of companies came, because they published the book, came to see me or call me and just said, look, we'd like you to implement this if you can in our business and try and help us. And so that's kind of how it started, really. It started off as philanthropic for individuals and then turned into businesses. And as I said, has now grown globally and with newspapers around the world measuring best places to work, using the methodology that I've talked about. It grew from that, really. But the sad thing that drives me is so many people are unhappy in there. And for a lot of them, it's thinking about being positive about what you're going to do. I was very lucky that when I went to the London Business School, there was a great professor there called Rob Goffey, and he lectured in human resources. And there was some great lessons I learned from him. One was around leadership, and there's a wonderful Harvard Business School paper called Nobody's Perfect, but a Team Can Be. It was a wonderful moment for me because what I learned is that I didn't need to be good at everything. I just need to have people around me who could be good at all the things that I wasn't good at. So that was a real release for me when I understood that and read that. The other thing that Rob said, which again has been so helpful to me, and this was 95, so this is 30 years ago now, Ben. He said, if you've got a problem, there are 2 positive things you can do about it and 1 negative thing. The 2 positive are, you decide that you're going to tackle the problem. You're going to tackle it head on. You're not happy. You're going to deal with it. That's positive. He said the second thing that you do that's positive is you let it go. You just say, it's a problem. I'm not happy, but either I don't have the energy, the brain power, or the will to want to tackle this. He said the 1 negative thing is that you dwell on it. You moan about it. And that drags everybody around you down as well, dragging you down. And in my new book, which comes out in September, which is called Work Happier, and is for employees all over the world to think about their happiness. In that I say, if you're waking up in the morning and you're not happy, you can either leave the job, do something about it. You can decide that for whatever reason that you're going to put up with it for now and you're going to positively just put up with it and let it go. The one thing that you should not do is moan about it when you leave your front door, moan about it when you get home, moan about it to your colleagues, moan about it to your partner, moan about it to your friends, because it's not good for your mental health. It's not good for their mental health, and it just won't do you any good. For me, trying to take a positive approach about how you're going to deal with the things that aren't right in your life is a key lesson, one of my key lessons.
Brilliant. And really, that's a lesson that goes all the way back to the Stoics, right? And Stoicism. Stephen Covey kind of made it famous, like the circle of control and influence, but kind of wasn't really his. That's kind of Marcus Aurelius, all those types of people, and the Stoics, just modern day application. Mark, if we try and grasp a few strands together and bring sort of happiness, kind of scaling up all into focus. Let's say I made you Chief Happiness Officer of a rapidly scaling organisation that didn't really have a budget to spend with you, but said, Mark, tell us the one thing we can do, or you would suggest we do, that is going to sort of double our staff employee retention rate, or half turnover, whichever way you want to look at it. What's one thing you would tell them to focus on?
So for me, Ben, it's always going to go back to those 6 things that I learned.
Got you.
And they don't cost anything.
Yeah.
So understanding what are the things that make your people happy, that drives your commercial performance, I mean, that for me is just absolutely key. So it would be to think about, how do my people feel? Are they happy? If they're not happy, where are they not happy? What can I do to improve that? Because improving that will drive all the other metrics of our business. I mean, that's what I would do.
Yeah, amazing. And I think you've actually already answered my next question previously. So if you could only ask one question in an employee engagement survey, that would give a really good signal of engagement. Like, what would that question be?
It would be, on a scale of 1 to 10, how well do you get on with your manager? It just has a massive impact.
Yeah. And it's interesting as well, because if you look at a lot of the research around the effectiveness of learning and development in organizations in the corporate world, we know one of the things that makes the most difference is line manager engagement, which is kind of more evidence it's all pointing in the same direction, right? It's that relationship you have with your manager, how engaged they are with your development. All the signs are going in the same direction, and it links to your 6 things, right? Because that was number 6, was it not? Kind of
your career development and how it's
career development
going forward is down to your manager.
Yeah, brilliant. Mark, let's finish up with some quick fire questions. What would you say is the single best piece of advice you would give someone looking to scale an already established business?
Well, understand why you want to do it. What's the logic? A lot of people just say, we're going to grow, we're going to double. So understanding why, I think that's the first thing. And then once you understand why you think it's an imperative, how you're going to do it, what you need to put in place.
My next question, a little bit of context for listeners. It struck me many years ago that a huge number of the tools that we use in leadership, in business, in charities, whatever, are the same tools and tactics that work really well for those of us who are parents. So what is one piece of leadership advice in the business world that you think applies equally to parenting?
It's a bit cliched. I found it to be true. It's enjoying the journey. With your kids, you never really think there's a point when they're not your kids. You might think, when they leave home and go to university or, join the army or get their first job or get married, you kind of think there are moments which are going to be joyous and that somehow that will be the end. And of course it never is. I mean, they're always your kids. They're always there. And you're always helping and supporting them through ups and downs. And there'll always be ups and downs. And it's that way in business. There isn't a moment. You may have a great year, win a big contract, but the reality is there will be ups, there will be downs. And what you've got to do is just learn to love the journey. You've got to learn to love the problems. I was saying to somebody the other week that I really enjoy doing difficult Sudokus. And I do them because they're difficult. And it's a real challenge to me. And I get half of them wrong and half of them I get right. but I do them because they're difficult. And if you're in a senior management position, you've just got to embrace the fact that dealing with difficult problems is what you do. You shouldn't run away from them. You shouldn't get angry when you get them. You should say, this is why I'm here. I'm here to deal with this. And I get my joy and my pleasure. I think for me, parenting is the same. It's that joy of knowing that it's not always going to be smooth. You are the parent. You have brought somebody into the world, and you are going to do the best that you can do for them to be the best that they can be. It's all about that. It's a journey. There'll be ups and downs. You just treat them all the same, and you just keep, as Churchill said, you just keep buggering on.
Yeah, it's another cliche, but without the downs, there can be no ups either, right? If life was a dead flat line, it would be pretty dull.
But then some people like that. What I found in my business life is that there are some people who like the roller coaster and some like the merry-go-round. And you just got to, for yourself, work out which of those two you prefer. Are you happy with the ups and downs and the difficulties, or do you just want every day to be the same? And when you've decided that, and you've decided things like, how hard you want to work, are you going to be content with doing fewer hours? Do you want to really push yourself? What do you want to do? And most people don't take the time to really think about, what is it that I want? And it's only when you've done that you can be truly content and think to yourself, you know what, I don't feel envious of that person over there who's done that, because they've made some very different decisions to the ones that I've made. And I'm really content with the ones I've made. So understanding yourself and what you really want, I think, is key to having a happy and fulfilled life.
Brilliant. If Waitrose had a secret leadership value that wasn't written down, that was kept from the public eye, what would it be?
It's a brilliant piece of strategy that the business has had forever, and the same as John Lewis. And that's because everybody owns the business, everybody is a partner. Because of that, everybody is made to feel as though they're an owner. And because everybody feels as though they're an owner, they give more. They're like owners. So it's one of the great lessons I took away with me. If you can make people feel that they are genuinely part of the business and that they are instrumental to its success, you can move mountains. You can absolutely move mountains.
Penultimate question. Let's say for a minute, your 30-year-old self, so 30-year-old Mark, came in and was shadowing you for a day as you are building and scaling WorkL. What do you think he would be most impressed and surprised about?
Gosh, I wasn't expecting that question. I was expecting the reverse, to say, what would I say to them? I hope they would say a few things. I hope they would say our ambition to grow a global platform. I think they would say the fact that we're trying to do something to help hundreds of millions of people have better lives, and how hard everybody works and how much they enjoy it. I think those would be the things, really. And my advice to them, for what it's worth, it goes back to when the graduates used to start in Waitrose, and I used to go and see them all in their first week. And one of the questions I'd ask them, Ben, is how many of you would like to be the CEO of Waitrose? And about 3/4 would put their hands up. And then I would say to them, a CEO would normally get 5 years running a business. They might get 10 if they're really lucky, but 5. And I would say to them, when do you want your 5 years? And they'd all think about it. And they'd normally say, in our mid-40s. And I'd say, that's probably about right. So if you think about, really senior CEO roles, 45 maybe to 50, 55. So I then ask them, what are you going to do for the next 24 years? And it's just thinking about your life and your career in that way, really. What are you going to do to best position yourself to have the skills and the experience to lead, a huge corporate organization and to be able to deliver? And how along the way do you go and get all the bits of experience you need? I think you were saying earlier that you need those things that go wrong. I've seen people get to senior positions and they've had gilded careers when they've been promoted and lauded, but they've never really seen failure. They've never seen everything around them go wrong and think, how do I deal with this? How do I become stronger? So I think there's a lot in thinking about your career over a long time frame and thinking about, if I'm going to get one of the most senior jobs in business, what do I need to learn? and how do I learn it?
And that's a brilliant segue, Mark, seeing as you said, thinking about long time frames. So if there is one belief about leadership that you hope is steadfast and is still being held onto in 100 years' time, what would that be for you?
That leaders genuinely try to do the right thing, that they're driven by a belief that what they're doing is making the world a better place. And for me, the great leaders do that. They're able to think about, what are we doing as a team, as an organization, as a government, whatever it is, to make the world a better place? And every day they're driven by that purpose, that belief. And everybody around them understands what they're doing and where they're going. So great leadership to me, as I said earlier, looks like a really clear plan, a strategy, well communicated, making everybody feel that they're part of that plan and strategy, and then being endlessly optimistic about delivery. If people can do that, then in 100 years' time, as they do it today, that'll be fantastic.
Mark, thank you so much for your time today on the podcast. But I think more important than your time, thank you for being so open and free in sharing your experience and expertise that you've collected over the years. And I think for me personally, thank you for what you're doing with WorkL. It really speaks to my beliefs about leadership and work. And I think it's incredibly important and much needed. So thank you for that as well.
You're very welcome, Ben, and thank you very much for all you do.
I'm sure you'll agree that was an incredibly insightful and generous conversation. From scaling Waitrose to launching WorkL, Mark's perspective on leadership and workplace happiness, I think, is both deeply human and commercially razor sharp. And what I really loved about this episode is how aligned it is with something I see in my own work every day. That is that the most effective scale-up leaders are the ones who never lose sight of their people.